Dr. Gendusa. My favorite writer, Doris Lessing, and Geralda. So the presentation, the essentializing higher education curricula, reiscription of the British and Euro-Mediterranean identity mosaic in Doris Lessing and Bernardino Evaristo fictions.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Esther Gendusa. I'm a PhD student at the University of Palermo, and my research interest lie where actually gender and post-colonial studies interact. No, I don't have one.
No problem.
Right. So the contemporary era.
It's not necessary.
Yes, humanistic sector. So. The contemporary era is one where the socio-political and cultural scenes are dominated by a multiplicity of interlacing scopic regimes, which institutions of higher education greatly contribute to, especially through the teaching of literature. Moreover, modes of representation present an inextricable relationship with social facts and structures of social relations. The existence of these multiple levels of connections implies that the production of meanings is never to be intended exclusively limited symbolic realm. As Arina Pederai states, quote, the image, the imaginary, these are all the terms which direct us to something critical and new in global cultural processes. The imagination as a social practice. The imagination has become an organized field of social practices and a form of negotiation between sides of agency, individuals, and globally defined fields of possibility, unquote. Among the most pervasive symbolic models are the concept of nation and national belonging, which have been largely explored by Benedict Anderson. Notably, his views about the nation reside in the concept cultural construct and on the idea that the deriving configuration of the national character has to be intended as embedded into historical contingency. Quote, nationality, as well as nationalism, are cultural artifacts of a particular kind. To understand them properly, we need to consider carefully how they have come into historical being. In what ways the meanings have changed over time, unquote. Extending Anderson's elaboration, Catherine Hall points to the internally heterogeneous nature of nationality and to the multiple contending forces that pervade it. In other words, imagined communities, I quote, have always been constructed through elaborated ideological and political work which produces a sense of nation and national identity, but a sense which can always be challenged, for there is no national identity, rather competing national identities jostle with each other in a struggle for dominance, unquote. Against this theoretical background, exploring the interweaving of the analytic categories of race and gender, the current work will focus on analysis of the peculiar reconfiguration of the British and Euro-Mediterranean identity at large, as respects the proposed in Doris Lessing the Grass is Singing and in Bernardino Evaristo's The Emperor's Baby. Emphasis will be conferred on the potential these novels present of implementing the delineation of new intercultural literary canons within the higher education teaching curricula. Indeed, the authors intervene in the reinscription of both the national and European identity paradigms from a perspective which posits itself as internal to the British cultural system. To this end, the conceptualization of nation will prove a productively instrumental tool. A recognition of the fact that the historically and culturally situated notion of national identity cannot but be analyzed as the result of the interconnection of multiple interacting variables of differentiation, the frame of analytic reference will thus prioritize an interpretive grid underpinned by the gender-race nexus. As far as Lessing's The Grass is Singing is concerned, this theoretical nexus will prove instrumental to investigate the dynamics of internal differentiation, subordination and exclusion that inform the English community in colonial Rhodesia, as well as the role of gender, I quote, as a signifying practice denoting power relations between the two sexes, unquote. The interrelationship of race and gender will also prove instrumental to the analysis of Evaristo's novels, which in turn need to be contextualized within the contemporary debate about the modes of representation of British national identity. This critical itinerary makes it possible to highlight Lessing unveil of the discontinuity and heterogeneity inherent to the group of the English colonizers. Indeed, the positioning of Mary, the protagonist of the novel, proves the result of a complicated tension arising from her being a subordinate subject within the dominant group of the colonizers. This means that on the one hand she is an active agent of imperialism, and she actually profits by the advantages deriving from the empire, as the following scene demonstrates. I quote from the novel. Her eyes happened to fall in a candle box under the table, where the scrubbing brushes and soap were kept, and she said to the boy, "Scrub this floor." "I scrubbed it this morning," said the native slowly, looking at her, his eyes smouldering. She said, I said scrub it, do it at once." Unquote. However, on the other hand, she is herself subjugated to the law of the father, acting through a rigid policy of control on female sexuality, since on a general level, the official mind-linked control of sexuality to social order and disorder, Mary's supposed interracial relationship with a black houseboy is in fact viewed as a regressive act. Against this background, Mary's body becomes the site where numerous and contradictory configurations of the Western woman, elaborated in the light of a patriarchal ideology, converge. On the one hand, the female protagonist is deprived of autonomous social agency, so proving, according to Hilary Callan's formulation, an quote, incorporated wife, unquote. However, on a symbolic level, she is also paradoxically entrusted with the mission of preserving the English community's morality. Thus, Lessing illustrates that in the colonies, the female body becomes a racial boundary and a metaphoric limit to the national body politic. Women were thus identified with the socio-political role of mothers and wives of the nation. However, the symbolic configuration implied a restriction on their sexual and marital relations. An analysis Asian gender-blind approaches allows us to unveil Lessing's foregrounding of the colonial women's subordination internal to the English community, and consequently the positional nature of a novel with respect to an official colonial discourse which prescribed the unity and compactness of the white community as a fundamental requirement for the imperialist enterprise. Similarly, Evaristo, now critically acclaimed as one of the most original women writers within the contemporary Black British literary landscape, from the specific perspective on an Anglo-Nigerian London-born woman writer of mixed origins, intervenes within traditional hegemonic representational circuits, be they British or European, so contributing to rewrite the notion of English national identity and to re-examine European history from new non-exogenary perspectives. Indeed, her production is pervaded by an engagement with questions related to national as well as European identity politics, and by a sensitiveness to the inextricability of the gender-race nexus. Together with the process of historical excavation, thematic innovation characterized the novels aim to deconstruct and recast the traditional symbolic assumptions on which Englishness, in the context of ancient and new notions of fortress Europe, is constructed. Indeed, they reveal themselves as a way to interrupt the transmission of the persistent gender bias and racist cultural models, informing the representations of the national character as elaborated within official discursive practices. The question of national identity pervades Evaristo the Emperor's Baby, which is set in Roman Britannia. Inspired by Peter Freier's Staying Power, groundbreaking text documenting the presence of black people in the British Isles since the Roman period, the novel becomes the occasion to scrutinize British as well as classical European history and to question the axiom of supposed racially pure British past. To also, quote, throw it into sharp relief, as Louise Bernard suggests, the idea of heritage as a peculiar kind of industry, unquote. The novel centered around the life experience of Zuleika, a London-born young woman of Sudanese origin. Forcefully married to Felix, a much older Roman senator, she ends up having an intense love affair with Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, who is of African origin himself, which will ultimately determine her death. Evaristo's deliberate emphasis on Severus being a Libyan-born emperor and a conventional depiction of the ethnic differentiation that characterized the Roman Londinium unveils the misuses inherent in the transmission of the official history. Configured as an outpost of the Roman Empire, versus Britannia is epitomized by decentered Londinium, whose ethnic-linguistic blending inevitably recall the cosmopolitanism of today's London. The deriving superposition results in an effective imaginative cross-fertilization whereby, on the one end, Roman Londinium is re-actualized to a vision of contemporary London, and deliberate linguistic anachronism, mixing different as well as temporally distant languages. On the other end, the positive projections of Aristo's Roman city hint at the productive transnational potential of the contemporary metropolis. Indeed, Zuleika's status as a free black woman rather than a slave further contributes to denaturalize folk images of black people reproduced by imperial discursive practices, while alerting attention to history as a representational construct. However, Aristo's imaginative reconstruction of London, deliberately aimed at redressing forms of national amnesia and history erosions, is not conducted in simplistic terms. The novel problematizes the issue of national belonging and of gender identity. In fact, although Zuleika is and feels a Roman citizen, a right or lay claim to citizenship is openly questioned by a sister-in-law who symbolically ostracized her because of her ethnic origins. Zuleika's relationship to the Roman Empire recalls women's problematic terms of inclusion within the modern nation-state. Forced and loveless married at a very young age, she partakes of imperial richness not as a woman per se, but as the wife of a Roman senator, whose self-realization is confined within the stifled boundaries of domesticity. Moreover, an affair with the emperor, transgression to this rigid system of gender roles, will be violently punished, whilst Felix's relationship with his mistresses are socially accepted as a reflection of his power. Finally, the oppositional nature of the identity configurations introduced by Lessing and Evariste can be fully appreciated only if we examine them through the lenses of the inextricable gender-race hermeneutic nexus. In that sense, Lessing and Aristo's novels can be seen as a part of a specific change occurring with the British cultural practice, as highlighted by Lola Young, who refers to a quote, a process of becoming embedded in British culture whilst reconstructing and redefining what British means, unquote. This shift, far from engendering further severances, significantly results in the imaginative recreation of historical connections, which inevitably imply the political act of shaping inclusive notions of identity and social cultural positioning. They also hint at the possibility for literature teaching of opening up new horizons of intercultural exchanges within the realm of higher education, which in turn would enable the de-essentialization of cultural policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hope so, spero di sì.
Any comments? Thank you very much. Licciardi.